It then becomes the task of the leaders to convince the masses of people that everyone benefits when the leaders benefit. In short, the people must be bamboozled into accepting the ideological rationales for government to expand and become an imperial power that rules as much as possible. And what kinds of rationales are there available? Almost any idea alive in the culture is open to being co-opted. If people are religious, the rulers claim that the empire is necessary for religious reasons. If they have a fear of some ghastly ideology like fascism or communism, the leaders can say they are staving off such systems. If they believe that their economic well-being is being threatened from abroad, an economic nationalism can be advanced. There are many other available rationales. In the interwar period, for example, race theory became popular among the educated elites of all Western nations, and this theory was often linked with a socialist plan for using eugenic policies to bring about some purported ideal. Nazism did not invent this, but it did use what was alive in the culture as a way of justifying its power. These ideas were no less popular in Britain and the United States. Americans have a deep-rooted attachment to the ideal of liberty, which is a glorious thing. But it is also why American leaders have always justified foreign wars in the name of liberating the oppressed peoples of the world. The mistake is in thinking that freedom can be achieved by means of force. The Cold War originated with the idea that the U.S. should do whatever was necessary to roll back the very Soviet client states that the U.S. worked to establish at the end of World War II. Then the U.S. pursued a series of wars in far-flung places that cost lives and liberty and did nothing to roll back communism. Murray Rothbard saw what was happening in the late 1940s and emerged as the last surviving member of the old right, the united love of free markets with an anti-imperial foreign policy. This eventually became known as libertarianism, which at its best form is as much opposed to imperial warmongering as anyone on the left. His strength as a writer and commentator on public affairs was that he saw through the official lies of the state, particularly in wartime. The more implausible the imperial war, the more a variety of rationales become necessary. Iraq has been justified on grounds of security, safety, religion, vengeance, and economics, each rationale carefully tailored to appeal to a certain demographic group. All that is necessary is that the state convince a majority, however temporarily. Hardly a day goes by when I don't receive emails from advocates of war explaining to me why the wars of the Bush administration are actually wonderful and just and great for all of us. They all have a different tenor. Some are about security. Some emphasize the need to overthrow foreign dictators. Some are religious in nature and express great fear about the old religion of Islam, with which the West has had peaceful and productive relations, provided we've not been working to overthrow their governments and invade their lands. But a theme has emerged from all these emails is the one that we need to be most on guard against: raw enthusiasm for the state as the appointed representative of American interests. In fact, I would say this attitude is un-American in the most profound sense. What must a person forget in order to believe in the unity of interests between U.S. foreign policy and the American people? They must forget that the U.S. was born in revolt, not only against the British Empire, but also against the very idea of empire itself. They must forget that the only way the U.S. Constitution was adopted was the promise that it would not act imperialistically at home or abroad. They must forget the warnings of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and many leaders of the 19th century. They must forget about the history of failure of our own imperial wars of the 20th century, in which guerrilla armies have consistently beat back our regular troops. Every American is right to be mighty angry at the Bush administration. Bush originally campaigned against the big government of Clinton and called for humility in foreign policy. And what did the Republicans do with their political capital? They squandered every last bit of it on an imperial adventure. In so doing, they further discredited other causes with which the Republicans are linked in the public mind, including the cause of free markets. War is all they have to show for themselves, and it's a disgrace. And at this late stage in the Iraq conflict, the Bush-run state is asking us to forget even how the Iraq war began. Recall that the idea was to bomb Baghdad, create shock and awe, decapitate the head of state, and then watch as the rest of the country celebrated their liberation from Saddam and threw flowers at us. Today, Iraq is a country in ruins. Death and violence are everywhere. The reconstruction is going nowhere, although billions have been stolen. Almost 10% of the population, including most of the Christians, have fled. The only immigrants coming in are those swearing to kill. And yet I read the headline of the New York Times, which quotes what is passed on as some sort of revelation from the military commanders in Iraq. They've decided that the future of Iraq depends heavily on taking Baghdad, cleaning out its rebels and dissidents, and enforcing this all through massive violence. Folks, this is how the war began. This is how it's ending. But let me say something in defense of the U.S. military commanders in Iraq who concocted this latest scheme. There is something intuitively plausible and honest about the statement that if a government can't control its own capital, it can't control the rest of the country. In fact, I propose that this same approach be used domestically. Before the federal government makes any more attempts to bring their proposed utopia to the rest of the country, let them eliminate poverty, crime, gang war, hate, despair, abuse, corruption, and injustice in Washington, D.C. Once that city is cleaned of all such vice, we can talk about moving on to other parts of the country, but I think I can safely predict a quagmire. The U.S. has no business attempting to run a government in Iraq halfway around the world. A policymaker who claims to be surprised by the resistance is feigning ignorance of the heritage of America. We are all rebels in our hearts. Anyone who longs for freedom must be. The same can be said of the entire United States. It is an utterly unviable project to attempt to rule 300 million people under a single central government. The experience of all mankind teaches us that. For that reason, a consistent anti-imperialist stance must not only oppose the U.S. war in Iraq in its attempt to manage governments anywhere in the world, but also favor a complete rollback of the U.S. empire at home on grounds that is contrary to liberty and contrary to our heritage. If we understand something about economics, we must also see that a consistent stance against imperialism must also favor a completely free market, not only within the territory of the state, but also with the entire world. The people who live in small city-states can be the most prosperous in history, provided they keep the markets free of any impediments, maintain a sound currency, and not interfere with the right of free association. The old liberal vision is as valid today as it was before 1776, before 1787, and in 1919. There is a unity in the idea of a free economy at home and abroad, and a reduced and devolved form of government. We must reclaim the spirit that Patrick Henry said was alive in America's youth. Why is it then that the Mises Institute is nearly alone in championing such a policy? After all, it is part of the conventional apparatus of received wisdom in this country that people who love free enterprise also love war, while those who love peace are also friendly to socialism and people-impoverishing ideologies like environmentalism. Why is it the Mises Institute position on this so rare? Well, we can observe that the position was rare in Mises' day too. When Rothbard took up the cause after World War II, he was nearly alone. And yes, this opinion is still rare, but it need not stay that way. The cause of anti-imperialism and freedom triumphed in 1776, and it can triumph again, provided we have the courage to continue to speak the truth. Never has the work of the Mises Institute been more essential. This country and this world needs a voice that addresses the questions that others not only fail to answer, but also fail to ask. The cause of liberty itself needs the Mises Institute. It needs our student programs to thrive. It needs our publishing to be even more aggressive and prolific. It needs our web presence to be even more spectacular. Academia is in desperate need of thinkers who understand what liberty means. The human population needs liberty in order to continue to grow in numbers and well-being, and liberty needs the champions to make it so. This is what is needed for social peace and economic prosperity. And above all, the Mises Institute needs you. your fighting spirit that inspires our work, and the confidence you give us to forge ahead and say what few others are willing to say. Thank you for all you have done to give voice to the wisdom of the ages, and for enabling us to point to a future in which the idea of liberty rises above all the ideologies that seek to kill the human spirit. Thank you.